One letter, one command, one secret the sewing club couldn't keep. Welcome to Phantom Mystery. I am your host, Edmund Cross. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your support makes this mystery family stronger every day. The bunting looked as though it had been ironed by someone with a grudge. It sagged in sullen loops across the parish hall, its faded reds and blues recalling better summers. All the same, the St. Luke's summer tea had drawn the village in a steady, genial trickle. Gardeners with fingernails stained to the moon, two ladies from the post office wrapped in floral second best, and a regiment of widowers who came for sponge cake but stayed for human voices. At the far end, where the light lay politely upon trestle tables, the St. Mary Mead Sewing Club held court. Their work, quilts, smocked baby frocks, a church banner partly stitched with angelic patience, was propped at proud angles. There were pincushions like sugar plums and a satin-lined workbox whose lid refused to stay open, as if guarding confidences. The club had given the village christening gowns and altar cloths for 3 decades. It had also, as most durable institutions do, acquired over time a certain quiet power that did not advertise itself, but which everyone obeyed. "Buttons," said Miss Honoria Pritchard, the club's chairwoman, with the smooth authority of a woman who had spent an entire life telling objects and people what they were. "We must never underestimate them. For the hinge of civility, I always say." Her audience, half sewing club, half captive friends, laughed obediently. Honoria enjoyed the acoustics in the parish hall. They liked her too, more or less. She had a talent for being useful to the vicar's wife, and impossible to refute at committee meetings. In her better moods, she was a fountain of practical advice. In her worse ones, a dam of criticism. Today she was in that bright, bossy middle ground that made the tea-table hum. Miss Jane Marple, small and untroubling in a hat that suggested violets had once grown upon it, observed Honoria's butterscotch dress with mild interest. The dress was cut to flatter, and did, if one preferred, a certain impressiveness to elegance. It also sported along the bodice a trim of covered buttons in an ambitious row. "Very stout workmanship," Miss Marple murmured to no one in particular, and sampled a seed cake that had the unfashionable decency to contain seeds. On the wall behind the club's display hung their new banner in progress. "St. Luke's Sewing Circle. Working in quietness and doing our own business," the motto, voted on, had been chosen by Honoria over the objections of Mrs. Amelia Finch, who maintained that the original scripture had been more subtle on the matter. "People," Amelia had said then, "don't like to be told what their business is." But the majority had admired how cunningly the words could be couched in cross-stitch. "Good afternoon to you." "Miss Marple," said Inspector Cray from the doorway with a deferential nod. He had come only for the raffle, it was widely known. His wife had set her heart on the hamper, and not at all for parish sociability. "Inspector," Miss Marple returned. She regarded raffles as one of the more revealing forms of community theatre. Just then, Mrs. Finch approached with a small paper parcel whose corners were fastened down by an anxious hand. She glanced to left and right, as if the air might be listening, and set it upon the needlework table next to a teacup that belonged to nobody, thereby ensuring some confusion later. "Delivered this morning," she said, voice lowered for Miss Marple's ear, but not enough to discourage eavesdroppers. "No stamp." Someone slipped it through the letterbox. I thought, perhaps Honoria should see it. Miss Marple's hand, small and unremarkable, undid the fold of the paper. Within lay a single card typed on an old machine. The letters crisp, where the ribbon had been inked lately, and ghostly where it had not. "End the sewing club at once." An eruption of judgments occurred silently in Miss Marple's mind, rather as a chemist's cupboard of jars might rattle and settle itself in a polite earthquake. She looked up. Across the hall the vicar's wife, Mrs. Denman, was cooing over the baby frocks with a harassed smile that did not entirely reach her eyes. Mr. Pierce, who sold newspapers and had never sold an unkind word about anyone, until he was certain it had already been circulated, hovered near the jam stall. Young Lily Hart from the dairy drew lemonade at a rate suggesting she had something to do with her hands or would have liked to. And behind the sewing club table, Honoria Pritchard's mouth was shaping instruction before instruction could be born, a midwife to her own decrees. "Gracious," Miss Marple said gently, "because one should never put gasoline on mystery, when a few drops of lavender will do." "That is rather direct." Amelia Finch's eyes, a good blue, searched Miss Marple's face and found it disappointingly mild. "You don't think? I mean, it's wicked, of course, and childish, but people sometimes write what they cannot say," Miss Marple observed. "Like sewing on a button where the hole ought to be mended. It holds, but only for a little." Before Amelia could reply, applause broke out. The raffle was beginning. The vicar stood at the front with a wooden box and a flourish that made him look briefly like a conjurer. The hamper, jars of chutney, a wedge of respectable cheese, biscuits with delusions of grandeur, glittered with cellophane beside him. "Tickets at the ready," Mr. Pierce called, as though the village might forget what a ticket was. Honoria Pritchard, the sort of woman whom luck occasionally courted simply out of embarrassment, was called upon to draw the first number. She relished the duty. "Fairness above all," she said, and plunged her hand into the box with theatrical justice. The hall watched the plump white hand with its square ring draw up a paper slip, watched the small smiles ripple. 209. A murmur. "That's me," said Lily Hart, surprised into a laugh that made several men remember being 20. "Dear child," Honoria said in the tone that pinched cheeks without touching them. "You'll do the hamper good." Lily came forward, pink-cheeked, and as she reached for the prize, her sleeve knocked into the needlework table. The satin-lined workbox, the one with the stubborn lid, tipped and clapped shut upon nothing. A small bright thing skittered to the floor and spun, emitting a brief, satisfied sound. It was a pair of embroidery scissors. Several people said, "Oh," in the way people do when nothing terrible has happened, and they are relieved to have something to remark upon. "It's nothing," Lily said, bending to retrieve the scissors. "Sorry, miss." "Leave it," said Honoria, not unkindly, but with a conclusiveness that made leaving it the only possible choice. Lily straightened, her smile hiccuping and then recovering, and turned away with the hamper cradled like a child who had decided to behave. Miss Marple, who had noticed the way Lily's hands had trembled, the way Mr. Pierce had leaned to see the number, and then leaned further as if numbers were a vantage point, let her gaze drift back to the paper parcel. She did not believe in coincidences, except the kind one sees in human conduct every Sunday, which are called habits. "Shall I give it to Honoria?" Amelia whispered. "In a moment," Miss Marple said. Her eyes had lit on an oddity so small it asked to be ignored. One of the covered buttons on Honoria's bodice bore the faintest smear, a darkening hardly more than a shadow against the butterscotch cloth, as if a thumb had pressed something damp and then changed its mind. "Ladies," Honoria declared, in that rich contralto that made ladies obedient whether they knew it or not, "and gentlemen, of course, do examine our banner. We've finished the border. The motto is to be placed tonight, and—" She paused. The pause was uncharacteristic. Those who knew Honoria best had learned to fear her silences even more than her pronouncements, for in them the machinery of opinion could be heard ratcheting to a higher setting. And she resumed, with a small clearing of the throat, "We may make a change to the wording." A sizzle passed through the club, excitement, alarm, relief, depending on the conscience applying the electricity. Mrs. Denman's harassed smile flickered. Amelia Finch blinked. Mr. Pierce prepared to be the first to have heard. Lily Hart hugged the hamper a fraction closer. As if it might be borrowed, Miss Marple found to her surprise that her heart had taken a small precise leap, like a needle catching a tight stitch. "What did you say?" Amelia asked too quickly. Honoria's eyes went to the banner and did not quite come back. "It is possible," she said, "that the sewing club has—" She gestured toward the card on the table without seeming to see it. "We shall discuss it in committee." Her hand lifted to smooth the row of buttons, a habitual possessive gesture, the proprietary stroke of a woman to her emblems. The hand stopped. Miss Marple watched the stopping more than she watched the hand. It was not theatrics. It was surprise, then something like appraisal, then a struggle with a sensation that no well-bred woman wished to display in public. "Honoria," Mrs. Denman said, already stepping forward. The vicar's wife had delivered 3 children and too many casseroles. She recognized a failing before it announced itself. Honoria drew in a breath. "Ridiculous," she managed in a voice 2 notes lower than her own. She swayed. The scissors on the floor gave a reproachful wink, as things do when implicated unfairly. The wooden raffle box thudded to the table as the vicar set it down in a hurry. Somewhere, a teacup made a delicate terminal sound. Honoria Pritchard collapsed as though a string had been cut behind the knees. Amelia Finch cried out. Mr. Pierce shouted for air, which is the first thing men demand from life and the last it offers. Mrs. Denman knelt, the habit of practical mercy taking over where fear tried to begin, and the inspector shouldered past with an authority that would have been comforting if it had known what to do. Miss Marple stood. Her face was concerned. It was also very still. She saw the smear on the button again, and she saw, too, the small half-moon of rawness at the edge of Honoria's thumb, the mark a person acquires when they worry a thread too often. She saw Amelia's anxious parcel, which somebody had moved 3 inches as though 3 inches could move a threat. She saw Lily's hands white about the hamper, and the way Mr. Pierce would soon tell the room what to think if the room did not decide soon. "Please," Miss Marple said, in a voice that had learned over years of teas and coronations and small tragedies to be heard without raising itself. Give her space, they did. It was too late to be useful and just in time to feel it. Within moments, which can be a lifetime when everyone is watching, Dr. Plummer arrived from the far end of the hall where he'd been discussing Rose Rust. His examination was brief and bleak. "I'm very sorry," he said. The parish hall had never been quieter. Even the bunting seemed to hold its breath. Inspector Cray, hat in hands before he remembered and put it on again, looked at the scattered sewing, the banner with its unfinished sermon, the small bright scissors on the floor, the card with its typed command. His face was not the sort that hid a thought and emerged prettier for it. "Right," he said. "Nobody leaves." Miss Marple's eyes, which had seen too many little oddities conspire into the large ones, went once around the room and rested a moment on the word quietness in the unfinished motto. She had the gentlest impression that someone present perhaps, had been working upon the village with the tidy focus of a seamstress binding off the last row. And now the thread had snapped. She folded her hands the better to listen. Inspector Cray's order settled over the parish hall like a tablecloth pulled tight. Doors were watched. Windows latched. Dr. Plummer covered Honoria with the pale crocheted throw from the raffle table, the homely act abolished argument. The inspector preferred method to speed. He posted the verger at the door, gathered cups onto a side table no one must touch, and faced the room with a schoolmaster air. "If anyone saw Miss Pritchard take food or drink just before she fell," he said, "I should like to hear it." A rustle like pages turning went round. Mrs. Denman spoke first. She had a sip of lemonade. I poured it. She touched her buttons. She does that when addressing a group. And then she faltered. Amelia Finch held up a small parcel. "This came through my letterbox this morning." No stamp. Inside lay a typed card. "End the sewing club at once." Inspector Cray wrapped it in his handkerchief. "Typewriters?" "3, said Mr. Pierce. "Post office, school ledger, and Miss Pritchard's Remington for minutes. Hers prints a very crisp E." Miss Marple stood a little aside, as polite as a hat stand. Her eyes rested on the row of covered buttons on Honoria's bodice. One bore a faint, dark smear, and on the small raw half-moon at the edge of her thumb, the mark people get when they worry a thread. Lily Hart hugged the hamper. "I drew lemonade at the tap," she said when asked. For many. For Miss Pritchard, Mrs. Denman poured. I did knock the workbox with my sleeve before, but nothing came of it. Not altogether nothing, Miss Marple said gently. The scissors fell, but they were blameless. The small bright thing still lay where it had spun to a stop. People dislike touching objects that have had a view of death. Dr. Plummer, who had sent for the stretcher, spoke aside. Shock isn't impossible, he murmured. There was a faint, acrid odor. It may be imagination. Sometimes one expects what one is meant to, Miss Marple said. Across the hall the unfinished banner waited, its motto still in an envelope. Working in quietness, doing our own business. That Honoria had proposed to change it was, in Miss Marple's arithmetic, a large number. Inspector Cray went through names steadily. When he reached Miss Marple, he gave her a look half sceptical, half grateful. You observe, ma'am. Anything that will save me time later. If it can be called a thing, Miss Marple replied. Miss Pritchard touched her buttons, as is her habit, and she had that nick upon her thumb. Habits are where mischief likes to sit down. He nodded. We'll look in the vestry. The committee cupboard. The verger fetched keys. The vestry smelt of beeswax and patient dust. The cupboard yielded with a cluck. Inside were minute books tied with tape, receipt books, a tin of buttons, a roll of black felt letters, and the Remington in its case. Inspector Cray lifted the machine with a handkerchief. The ribbon shone with recent ink. In the platen a sheet had been left. The keys had impressed a ghost line, and the sewing club at— How tidy of her, Miss Marple said. One can tell when tidiness is disturbed. And one can tell, the inspector returned, whose finger has been in her affairs. Miss Marple did not touch the tin of buttons, but regarded it as one looks at a small, honest witness. She thought of lemonade hardly drunk, and of a woman who smoothed her own authority under her palm when speaking. They returned to the hall. The sewing club had drawn into a cluster. The rest had thinned to the verger, Mr. Pierce, Lily, Mrs. Denman, and Amelia, whose face had learned a new paleness. Mrs. Finch, the inspector said, why bring the card here and not to me? It felt petty for the police and not petty for us, she said. I thought it a joke. Or someone cross about subscriptions. Someone is always cross about subscriptions, Mr. Pierce observed, unable to let a truth go lonely. Lily spoke suddenly. Miss Pritchard came to the dairy on Thursday. She told me to mind my conduct. I sometimes walk home with Tommy Denman when he's late. It's barely a path. Mrs. Denman's mouth pressed thin, then softened. Tommy is foolish, she said. But not wicked. Miss Marple marked where kindness chose sides. She also noticed the valuation in Mr. Pierce's eyes, counting the tale for later use. Inspector, she said, Miss Pritchard announced a change to the motto. Such people do not alter unless compelled by conscience or by circumstance. You think she was being pressed. I think some push preceded what looked like a step. The verger returned, with a loop of keys from Honoria's handbag. There is also the church safe, sir, he said. Tickets, petty cash, the banner fund. Later, the inspector said, we are not examining accounts. We are examining hands. Hands, Miss Marple repeated. Regrettably honest things. He looked at her, then at the buttons. You think she was touched by something? I think she smoothed her bodice as if calming a room. If a substance lay there that liked skin better than cloth, habit would do the rest. Dr. Plummer did not contradict her. Acrid, he said again, as if testing the taste. The inspector sent the constable to fetch the lemonade jug and the glass Miss Pritchard had used. Mrs. Denman identified it at once. The lip bore a faint smear of lipstick. She hardly drank, she said. She meant to speak after the raffle. To end the club? Amelia whispered. To move it, Miss Marple said. Or to move someone by saying so. That notion sifted through them like flour through a sieve. Very well, Inspector Cray said. We will proceed by visits and with care. Meanwhile, no one is to wash ribbons or compose statements for public performance. If you remember a little thing, say it. They were dismissed. The hall emptied cautiously as if the floor might move. Miss Marple stayed a moment, took a folded napkin, lifted the embroidery scissors without touching metal, and laid them within the satin-lined workbox. The lid, contrary for an hour, chose to stay open. Lily watched. "Do you think someone wanted to end us?" she asked. "My dear," Miss Marple said, "someone always wants to end a thing that has rules, and someone else wants to keep it because it has them. The rest of us try to behave in between. It is when behaving becomes too hard that something gives. And now we shall go home," Miss Marple said, "and in the quiet everyone will remember what their hands did today. Hands talk to their owners afterward. It is very inconvenient for them." Outside the bunting sagged, relieved of the effort of looking merry. The day had taken on the amber of hours that did not intend to be memorable and were made so. Miss Marple set out toward the cottage with the geraniums, counting as she went the habits that might be borrowed for mischief: a hand to buttons, a finger to thread, a sip refused. Somewhere among them, a very small detail had already begun to correct the village's memory, and by morning it would be waiting, tidy as a pin, to be picked up neatly. Inspector Cray's order held even as afternoon thinned into an unsettled dusk. Miss Marple walked home in the quiet that follows uproar. The geraniums on her sill met her with unreasonable cheerfulness. She set her hat on its peg, put the kettle on, and sat where the light fell cleanly. Her hands, which had touched nothing, folded as if they meant to listen. A knock came. Inspector Cray stood on her step, with the look of a man cross at puzzles yet willing to feed them. He accepted tea. "The lemonade jug is clean," he said. "No bitterness, no odd cloud. The glass shows only lipstick. Plummer will make a longer business of it." "And her dress?" "At the surgery." "May I look?" Miss Marple asked, "before expert opinion arrives. I have a memory for household accidents." Presently they went together. Dr. Plummer admitted them and stood back. Honoria Pritchard lay very still under the sheet, the butterscotch dress folded on a chair. Miss Marple did not touch the fabric. She leaned until her eyes were near enough to count the warp. The covered buttons made their tidy parade. The fourth from the collar wore a faint, dulled bloom. It was cleaner now, as if a wet thumb had drawn its gloss away. "A woman," Miss Marple murmured, "will sometimes press a tender place and make it tenderer. Have you a saucer and a spoon of water?" She laid a scrap of paper on the suspect button and let fall one drop. It pooled, spread unevenly, then drew into the weave with an odd reluctance, as if the cloth were part oiled. She sniffed very lightly. Not almond, not pear drops, a little like a cupboard where polishes live, without beeswax. Plummer tried and shook his head. "It could be cleaner," he said without conviction. "If it were cleaner," Miss Marple said, "Mrs. Pritchard would have it on all her buttons. One does not polish one button as a treat." She straightened. "The question is not what, but who would know to put a what there." "Her habit," Inspector Cray said. "Everyone knows she touches her buttons." "Everyone in the room," Miss Marple said. "But foreknowledge is not equal. Some know without loving, others know with resentment." "I've started my rounds," he said. "Mr. Pierce has opinions in packets. Mrs. Denman is steady. Lily Hart is all eyes." Amelia Finch shook in the doorway. "Shaking can be relief as much as fear," Miss Marple said. She brought the parcel. "That may be folly or conscience." "Did she speak of the change Miss Pritchard proposed?" "Only that Honoria had taken too much to telling people their business," he said. "And typewriters?" "The vestry Remington keeps a crispy. The school's is dry. The post office prints like an old man speaking through his hand. Pierce's limps. If the card was typed in the vestry, the typist is a fool or feels protected." "A sensible killer," Miss Marple said, "is never both." "It feels like something that began before today," Cray went on. Honoria signaled change. Someone typed a matching command. And then the change came in another form," Miss Marple finished. "People ask the world to do a thing, and when it declines, they attempt it themselves." She looked again at the button. "Ask the club about covered buttons. Who makes them? Who brings sets? Who stores spares? The tin in the cupboard had a dutiful look. You think someone prepared a spare with mischief and swapped it onto the dress? Perhaps this morning. Perhaps last night. Time matters less than the hand. A deft woman would need only a breath. Mrs. Denman dressed her for a pageant. Lily pinned the banner. Amelia has done everything and nothing. He grimaced. Pierce and a needle, no. Men manage when nobody else will, said Miss Marple. But if we confine ourselves for now to kindnesses permitted, we have a small familiar circle. Cray rose. I'll speak with them. And I'll ask who sells polishes that smell like cupboards without beeswax. I shall walk to the dairy, Miss Marple said. It is astonishing how much milk hears. She took the lane that edged the stream and past a hawthorn that had decided this year against berries. Lily Hart in the cool back room sluiced cans. She started, then laughed at herself and came forward with dripping hands. I keep thinking I shall see her walk in, she said. We carry the shape of a person longer than the person, Miss Marple replied. Who stitched Miss Pritchard's covered buttons? Mrs. Finch fancies herself for buttons, ma'am. She's neat and hates waste. But Miss Pritchard often did her own. She said one mustn't be beholden. I stitched 2 once when a cuff came off. She made me unpick and do them again. And this morning, she scolded me. Not for the raffle. For walking with Tommy Denman. She said I must choose whether I wanted respect. She said the club would be made proper, or else ended. She said some people wouldn't like what came out if it ended. Some people, Miss Marple repeated. And Mrs. Finch? She cried yesterday. I was taking cream to the vicarage and saw through the hedge. Miss Pritchard at her gate speaking low, and Mrs. Finch with her hand over her mouth like you do when a wind comes you weren't expecting. Thank you, Miss Marple said. We shall mind our business very hard, and in the end discover it is everyone else's. Outside, Mr. Pierce's bicycle appeared with a bell more conversational than warning. He dismounted as if a stage were required. Evening news, he said brightly. No arrest. The county is very interested. Your E limps, Mr. Pierce, Miss Marple observed. He had the decency to look caught. Dust in the type bars. Nothing is crisp in this air. Some letters cut clear no matter the weather, she said. One notices. She left him to the dairy girl's blush and took the long way to Mrs. Finch's cottage. The gate latch had been polished by generations of worry. Amelia opened at once as if listening had become a habit. She had not stopped shaking, only learned to hide it. So you think me cowardly, she said before Miss Marple could speak. Bringing that card to the hall, but I could not keep it in the house. It would have shouted. Cards do, Miss Marple said, especially when they say what one has been afraid of thinking. She sat in the front room, whose ornaments were determined by what would be dusted. Did Miss Pritchard visit you yesterday? Yes, Amelia whispered. She said there had been muddles with the accounts when my husband kept them, little muddles that anyone could read wickedly. If the club were dissolved and remade under the Parish Improvement League, she would see whispers remained whispers. Order is mercy, she said, and I must choose mercy. And what did you choose? I said I would think. Then the card came and I thought, someone else is choosing for us. Perhaps it was a warning shot. Warnings, Miss Marple said, often happen after the deed because we like to pretend we were generous first. Her eyes went to the mantle, at neatness with the tautness of apology. When you replace a covered button, do you keep a set ready? In the tin, Amelia said automatically, then flinched. Yes, in the cupboard in the vestry. There are patterns for each of us. The buttons must match. And who had the key before the verger fetched it? Miss Pritchard always. But yesterday she gave it me to take minutes today. I kept it overnight. I took it back early this morning. When you opened the cupboard, was anything not as you left it? Amelia closed her eyes to see the shelves. The tin had been moved forward only an inch, she whispered. I thought I misremembered. I often do. It is everyone's vice, Miss Marple said. Thank you, my dear. You have been brave in the correct direction. At her own doorstep later, the light gone to pewter, Miss Marple found an envelope under the mat, cheap enough to be anonymous. Inside lay a second typed card. It read with the same crisp E and the same marching words, "End it tonight." She stood very still and let it settle beside the first command. Somewhere a bell chose to be rung for practice. She lifted the card to the light and turned it, not as if it would confess, but as if it might continue the sentence it had been given. Then she set it beside the teapot and took down from the dresser a small, long unused thimble. One prepares for sewing by assembling the tools that fit the hand. One prepares for people the same way. She fastened the thimble inside her palm. The thimble sat, a firm thought against Miss Marple's palm as she slid the second card into its envelope. She took her umbrella, pointer not shelter, and walked to Inspector Cray's. He opened before her second knock. He read "End it tonight," frowned. "Tonight," he said. "What is it?" "The club," Miss Marple said, "and something the writer cannot name." "The vestry is locked," Cray said. "Hall 2. Verger watching. Mrs. Denman says Tommy is home. Pierce is out. Plummer has the dress. The verger will guard the yard and miss a door if he has always gone by the yard," Miss Marple said. They went to the church. The south door was bolted. The north door's squeak proved it fast. Scent not beeswax, but the sharp cupboard note she had smelt on Honoria's button lingered. "The vicar's wife will have her own key," Miss Marple said. "Let's ask her," Cray replied. "At the vicarage, Mrs. Denman received them. Parish proofs lay on the table beside a duster cleaner than the mantel. I am writing a notice the village can bear," she said. "You are precise," Miss Marple said. "I did not want her dead," Mrs. Denman said. "Who typed minutes when Miss Pritchard could not?" Cray asked. "I did sometimes," she said. "The Remington lives in the cupboard. I strike too gently. My E is not crisp. You have a key?" She lifted a bunch. "One tag read vestry, and the Polish you favor, wax, and a spot of the other for marks." She flushed. "I tried it on the mantel." They left her and went behind the hall. A bicycle rolled on its toes. A bell caught by a nervous finger spoke. "Pierce," Cray said. "I came for a book," Mr. Pierce said. "Go home," Cray told him. They let him pedal off. The thimble in Miss Marple's palm felt like an appointment kept. At her cottage, Amelia Finch perched on the step. "I did not touch Honoria," she said. "I stood behind the table and thought, stop smoothing yourself," and then she fell. "When you opened the cupboard this morning, was anything not as you left it yesterday?" Miss Marple asked. "The button tin sat an inch forward," Amelia whispered. "Mrs. Denman came early for a jug. She said she would straighten the parish table. After, the tin seemed nearer the edge. I thought I misremembered." "Light both lamps," Miss Marple said. When Amelia had gone, Miss Marple set the two cards by her teapot. The second impression was shallower, the spacing the same hurried rhythm. From a drawer she took an old parish notice saved for a recipe. The E looked cousin to the cards. At 9:30 the church bell gave a single foolish stroke, the rope caught by a careless elbow. Miss Marple rose, umbrella in hand, thimble kissing her palm, and took the back lane. The verger was not at his post. In that gap, someone moved along the chancel shadow with the speed of a person who believes speed is invisible in darkness. "We are none of us asleep," Miss Marple observed into the west door. Silence judged exits. "Miss Marple," said Mrs. Denman's voice. "You startled me. Lilies for the altar, and a hymn book, and the key to rescue the Remington from a dangling command?" Miss Marple asked. "You typed nothing wicked. You dislike half-finished sentences." "If I typed anything, it was to avert a quarrel," Mrs. Denman said. "Honoria told me yesterday she meant to move the club under the Parish Improvement League." Kindly and brutally. "The village is not ready to be supervised by notices. I hoped a firm anonymous prod might make the committee pause. Warnings," Miss Marple said, "often arrive after the deed. Did you move the tin this morning?" "I did," Mrs. Denman said. "An inch to see the inventory. I did not touch Honoria's dress. I have no poison." "Most murderers think better of their efficiency," Miss Marple said. "Where were you when she fell?" "Beside the banner." They went to the cupboard. Mrs. Denman unlocked it. Miss Marple lifted the button tin's lid with her umbrella tip. Inside lay matched sets in envelopes inked with names. Honoria's had one empty circle and one button, whose satin bore a dulled bloom when held to the light. "Do you see?" Miss Marple asked. "Someone made another and switched it," Mrs. Denman said, "and oiled it, or worse. So when she smoothed herself—" "Habit did the rest," Miss Marple said. "A nick on her thumb would invite what cloth refused. Who hates a club enough to learn its buttons?" "Not hate," Miss Marple said. "Steadiness. Someone correcting a pattern in secret. Someone who knows cupboards and keys, whose movements pass as help, who is told that if the club ends, old muddles may be made public. Amelia." Mrs. Denman breathed. "Amelia is terrified and tidy and had the key overnight," Miss Marple said. "That makes her dangerous in someone else's story." "We must decide whose." Footsteps came. The verger returned, abashed. Inspector Cray followed, having found the west door unlatched. He took in the cupboard, the tin. "Well, someone prepared a button," Miss Marple said, "and someone typed with conscience instead of plan. The two may not be the same. Tonight's 'it' was a sentence longing to be finished, not a murder longing to be improved." Cray rubbed his brow. "We'll speak to the draper in the morning, who buys covered button kits, who ordered satin of that shade, who paid cash. And Lily," he added, "has needle hands. I've seen her darn a crate liner like lace." "She is deft," Miss Marple agreed, "but deftness lends itself to kindness more often than to murder. Ask who hemmed the choir stalls last month. The person who stayed late will tell you who carries keys when others forget. Also, have the lemonade cloths kept aside. People who clean from zeal carry traces of what they think they are removing." "Wise," Cray said. Miss Marple closed the tin with a click. "Tomorrow we must speak with Lily about covered buttons, and with the draper about satin. And someone else will have a restless night, because when one begins a pattern in secret, the unfinished row scratches the mind like a burr. Outside, the air wore the blankness fields have after heat." Mrs. Denman paused. "If the club ends, what happens to the charity work?" "It continues," Miss Marple said. "But first the village will behave badly, then apologize in practical ways." She walked home with the thimble warming her hand, thinking of hands and their helpless conversations with buttons, of a tin moved an inch, of a woman who smoothed her bodice because she always had, and of another who had decided to change a motto and perhaps as she spoke changed her own ending. Somewhere a bicycle bell sent home rang in an empty lane and said that someone had been almost noticed and did not like it. Morning brought an honesty of light that made even the hedges look factual. Miss Marple boiled her egg, ate it without argument, and took the lane to the high street while the village was still rubbing its eyes. The bell of Mr. Cutts's drapery announced her, with the discreet optimism that hung on every counter. He came out of the back like a spool set rolling, small, grizzled, and eager to be exact. Miss Marple asked for cottons in butterscotch shades, and, as if attached by an invisible thread, the conversation drew itself to covered buttons and who bought them. "Ladies do," Mr. Cutts said, opening his book with a pleased finger. "Miss Pritchard purchased a gross of blanks in April. Mrs. Finch bought a refill of the smaller size last week. Practical woman, hates an orphan garment. The vicar's wife asked for satin to match the banner border. Lily Hart buys needles and the inexpensive cotton, strong as sin. She darns for neighbours. I don't keep track of charity. It goes out of the shop like breath. And solvents," Miss Marple asked mildly. "For spots. For stubbornness. I stock beeswax, starch, spirits of turpentine, a tin of metal polish, and piano key cleaner that would strip a confession. You can smell their pedigree. Yesterday I sold a small bottle of spirits. Mrs. Denman. She looked like a woman rehearsing an apology for buying something improper, and then decided to be sensible. Rubber finger cots." Mr. Cutts beamed at this proof of her seriousness. "2 packets the week before last. One to Mrs. Finch for her husband's ledger work. He blots when nervous. The other to Lily. She said milk chaps her thumb in cold. Miss Marple bought her cottons, complimented the moral character of his pins, and stepped out as Inspector Cray came briskly along with the air of a man being chased by his own list. He accepted from Mr. Cutts a note of purchases and fell into stride with Miss Marple. "Plummer telephoned," he said. "No trace of poison in the lemonade. On the dress, by the 4th button, traces of a volatile solvent," he made a face at the word, "that could carry other things. He will not guess aloud. He wants facts that don't wriggle." "Then we shall give him hands that did," Miss Marple said. "Mrs. Denman moved the tin. She says so. Mr. Cutts says she bought spirits yesterday. Amelia had the key overnight. Lily owns rubber cots and deftness. Mr. Pierce has a rolling conscience and a bicycle that enters places before permission. Pierce says he saw Honoria meet a stranger by the hedge near Finch's on Wednesday," Cray retorted. "Pierce's strangers are often pillars of the parish glimpsed in unflattering weather. Wednesday was when Amelia cried," Miss Marple said, "and yesterday was when Mrs. Denman rehearsed an apology to herself. People do their feeling first and their thinking after, like airing a room and then discovering the wind. They turned to the church. The verger met them with the spruceness of a man who had fallen short once, and now had his buttons counted. He had kept the vestry locked, the hall locked, and his lunch plain. Inside the cupboard, the button tin waited with genteel patience. Inspector Cray lifted the envelope labelled H.P. in Amelia's neat hand. It held 5 covered buttons, and one whose satin showed, when slanted to the window, that dull bloom Miss Marple had seen and not inhaled. "Plummer shall have this," Cray said. "And the envelope, and your umbrella tip to keep us all virtuous." They walked to the dairy next. The back room was soothed by cool stone and the smell of water that had decided to be useful. Lily Hart was tying paper on bottles, quick and exact. She had a band of rag round her thumb as modest as a ring. She flushed when she saw them and pretended to study a knot. "I heard about the second card," she said, eyes on string. "Mr. Pierce told Mrs. Bowman and she told everyone. Rumor has no brakes," Cray said. "Tell me about Wednesday." "I left early to fetch my shoes from Cutts. Miss Pritchard spoke to me by the lane. She said, in a manner of speaking, that if the club was remade under the parish league, the standard would rise, and so would I if I chose. She said, kindly and cruelly, that standing near Tommy doesn't make me taller. I cried later, I am tired of being instructed. Who hemmed the choir stoles last month? Miss Marple asked. I did too, Mrs. Finch 3, Mrs. Denman 1, and Mrs. Pritchard fixed everyone's corners because they weren't square, Lily said without rancour. She made us laugh when she was not making us small. You bought rubber cots, Miss Marple said. You are sensible. I have skin that divides its days between milk and needles, Lily replied. I blister and I mend. Miss Pritchard said I'd hands worth watching. I chose to take that kindly. They left her precise bottles and walked to Mrs. Finch's cottage. Amelia opened before they knocked, as if she listened for her name everywhere and heard it. The sitting room had been arranged for confession, chairs as if for visitors who did not intend to stay, tea laid for people expected to drink and go, a cloth so tight on the table one feared to crease it. I have hardly slept, she said. I prayed for the club not to end, and for Honoria not to be the sort of person who ends things, and for the accounts to be cleaner than they were, and turn out that I was wrong about them. Did you write to yourself in a stronger voice, and then deliver it to your own letterbox? Miss Marple asked gently. To make your prayer sound like a rule? Amelia's hands twisted as if at thread that would not take. I typed the first card, she whispered, and shut her eyes as if the act would be visible there. I meant to frighten the committee into delaying. I put it through this morning because I could not bear having it. I did not send the second. I did not touch Honoria. I am not clever enough to harm someone in a way that looks like tidying. I am only clever enough to tidy. Who came to your gate on Wednesday? Cray asked. Honoria, Amelia said, colour rising. She said very low that if the club reformed properly our mistakes would rest. If it refused, some people who had been busy in the past would find themselves explained in public. She said this as if it were mercy. Then she saw Mrs. Denman at the corner, and changed the subject to lengths of lace. "She gave you the key, then?" Miss Marple said. "Yes, I kept it under the clock and it ticked louder. I returned it early." On the way out, Inspector Cray said, "She could have prepared a button in her tidy kitchen, wearing a rubber cot, and switched it this morning when she moved the tin." "She says she moved nothing," Miss Marple reminded him, "and terror teaches the wrong boldness. Confessions arrive before accusations. Amelia's vice is acquiescence. She follows strength. She does not engineer it." They crossed the green toward the post office. Mr. Pierce watched them through the window with the fascinated dismay of a man who likes to know and fears to be known. He summoned a smile and said, "News travels in circles, Miss Marple. One hopes the police are pursuing the straight line. One hopes you will lend them your bicycle bell when it is not otherwise employed," Miss Marple returned. "You saw a stranger by Mrs. Finch's hedge." "A man in a dark hat," Pierce insisted, happy to embroider. "Stood too still for a villager." "Many honest men stand still to avoid being seen being foolish," Miss Marple said. "It makes them look like strangers." "If you'd named his shoes, I'd believe you more," he flushed. "You think me a liar. I think you a dramatist," she said. "But even dramatists recognize footsteps. If you hear them tonight, tell Inspector Cray instead of the street." They had not yet reached the church when the first thin ribbon of smoke wrote its little sentence along the edge of the roof. The verger came running from the side path with a cry that shivered between alarm and apology. "Vestry!" I smelt it, and oh, Lord forgive me, I'd only stepped out. Inside, a wastebasket smouldered like a sulk caught out. The smoke was the pale kind that pretends to be less than it is. Cray overturned the bin onto the stone flags and stamped the edges with practical violence. Miss Marple, thimble snug against her palm, reached with her umbrella and hooked from among the darkened shreds the thing that had made the smoke important, the Remington's ribbon cartridge, half-melted, adhesive as a lie, and the sheet left in the platen, charred into lace along its lower edge, the words "End the sew" breaking off in a blackened ornament. "Someone has tried," Cray said between his teeth, "to end the sentence for us." "Or to end its memory," Miss Marple said. She lowered the umbrella tip gently, as if returning a needle to its book. "Fire is the friend of people who have only lately learned to be bold, and the enemy of people who have been bold too long. Very childish, very quick. Not Pierce. He would have found an audience. Not Amelia. She would have folded ashes into a napkin and apologized to them. Not Lily. She understands how smoke clings and would not risk the dairy. Not Mrs. Denman. She can bear to keep things until morning. Someone else whose habit would put them here, and whose conscience could not bear the Remington rehearsing their nerves. The verger?" Cray asked, shocked because he liked the man to be simple. "Keys make honest men interesting," Miss Marple replied. "But there is another sort of key. Consider how one enters rooms with errands. Consider who writes notices, delivers parcels, corrects other people's lists, and can pass anywhere with a reason." Cray turned, the line of his worry altering. "How you think," he said, "that our murderer has not ended anything yet?" "I think," Miss Marple said, "they have tried twice to end the wrong thing. And now because of smoke they will need to begin again, quickly, before someone notices what they cannot bear being seen." Inspector Cray sent the verger for water and a broom he did not need, the better to see who would come to fuss. People who cannot let small fires be stamped out often have larger ones in them. No one arrived except the verger, pushing responsibility before him like a barrow. Dr. Plummer, fetched by a boy, came with the air of a man whose tea had been misled. He agreed the ribbon had been meant for forgetting. Miss Marple, standing where the smoke had been, thought of hands and errands and places one could enter without remark, if one habitually straightened what other people left askew. "I shall post a constable at the vestry," Cray said, "and another at the hall. We'll keep keys where keys have company and trouble where it can be seen. Trouble prefers the shadow of usefulness," Miss Marple said. "Put your constable in a chair with nothing to do and a good conscience. The right person will lend him an errand. She went home to write 2 notes in a hand that had corrected recipes for 60 years. One asked Mrs. Denman if she would be so very kind as to bring the committee roll to the hall at 6 for a brief, decent discussion. No resolutions, only mercy in practical terms. The other, for Lily Hart, asked whether she might fetch the banner border for Miss Marple's old eyes to admire its corners in better light. Miss Marple sealed both with a calm that was not indifference but timing. At 5, the High Street wore its late afternoon fatigue like a neat apron. Mr. Pierce stood in his doorway folding evening papers as if they might choose a better headline under his persuasion. "A meeting," he said when Miss Marple paused. "Rumour says so. Rumour writes our notices now." "A meeting," Miss Marple agreed. "Mercy is easier in daylight. Will you come?" "I am merely a vendor of other people's sentences," he said with a puff of importance. "But I do like to see punctuation applied." At the vicarage, Mrs. Denman had already tied the committee roll with green ribbon and set out a plate of biscuits that apologized for being plain. She read Miss Marple's note and folded it into a pocket, as if to keep her impulse obedient. "I am glad," she said. "The village needs to be told what it is allowed to feel." "Feeling is a long road to be shortened by a chair and a reasonable tone," Miss Marple said. "We will sit and ask the right questions, which do not accuse but remember." Lily came with the banner border rolled like a careful secret and the sober happiness of a girl given a task that could not be laughed at. "The corner I mended is this one," she said, showing the tiny neatness that looked accidental until one looked harder. Miss Pritchard would have scolded, but then she would have smiled. She was dangerous because the smile made the scold feel like a favor. Amelia Finch arrived at the hall early and fumbled with the urn as if grateful to be commanded by water and time. The 2 ladies from the post office, Mrs. Bowman and Miss Reed, both made of string and starch, entered with their shared look that said they had decided long ago that anything unexpected was bad manners. The verger hovered with chairs. Mr. Pierce came last among the early ones, a man who never admitted he was early, only inevitable. Inspector Cray, precise at 6, took the chair at the end of the trestle table without ceremony. "We are here," he said, "not to accuse but to understand what Honoria Pritchard intended, and what someone else intended for her. I have posted men where mischief is likely to mistake them for furniture. We shall be tedious and therefore safe." This won the thin laugh that makes rooms behave. Miss Marple sat where she could see people's hands without looking as if she were. Mrs. Denman put the committee roll on the table with reverence unexaggerated. Lily unrolled the border and laid it flat, smoothing it once with a palm that knew the weight of linen. "First," Cray said, "we will settle an anxiety. The accounts of the sewing club show no theft, only muddle. Honoria believed remaking the club under a different umbrella would tidy narratives and feelings at once. That is a policeman's fantasy. It is also a kind of kindness. Mrs. Finch, you are not to be threatened by whispers past their usefulness." Amelia's breath came all at once, and then remembered to go away properly. The room softened a fraction. People are more available to fact when someone else has stopped drowning. "Second," Cray continued, "someone typed 2 cards. Mrs. Finch has admitted the first. She meant to startle the committee into hesitation. The second, Miss Marple received it, was meant to force an ending tonight. Someone also tried to burn remnants of a typed page and the ribbon. This shows panic learned late. We will come back to it. Third," Miss Marple said mildly when the pause permitted a woman to be heard, "the covered button. I believe someone prepared one and replaced it among Miss Pritchard's spares, oiled, perhaps with a carrier to persuade it to share itself, so that when she smoothed herself, as she often did, a tender thumb would press trouble where it could get in. This is very neat mischief. It belongs to someone who does not flourish with listeners but with lists." Eyes, as they will, went round the room like a tray of cups. They touched Amelia and moved away, too frightened. Brushed Mrs. Denman and did not stick, too composed. regarded Lily and redistributed their attention, too young to be permitted sophistication, skipped the verger, too ordinary, lingered unwillingly and briefly on Mr. Pierce, too noisy. They came to rest as if relieved to find their way home on Miss Reed of the post office. Miss Reed blinked not daintily but like a person who has dust in her honesty. She had the lower lip of a child who has decided not to cry because it would be inefficient. "If you are looking at me because I handle parcels," she said, her voice thin but level, "I am accustomed to being looked at when anything goes missing. But no one ever asks who puts the right letters through the right slots for 20 years. One mistake makes a reputation. Accuracy merely bores it." Mrs. Bowman, affronted on schedule, sniffed. "Miss Reed," she said, "does not take decisions. That is my duty." "That," Miss Marple said gently, "is precisely the sort of sentence that turns decent people towards secret competence. Miss Reed knows all the doors because she is told to take things to them. She corrects lists when they are wrong and is thanked by silence. She is present where errands are. She would know that the vestry ribbon had a crispy because she is the sort of woman for whom such letters are neighbours. She would not be bold enough to confront Miss Pritchard, but she would be driven mad by being corrected in the hearing of others and then relied upon in the next breath. Miss Reed's eyes broke in that way eyes do when truth catches up with timidity. "She called my notices untidy," she said with a small adult shame. "She took the list from my hand and rewrote it in front of Mr. Pierce, who cannot wait to have a thing to repeat. If the club moved under the Parish Improvement League," she said, "we would do things properly, and people like me would lick envelopes instead of making arrangements. I have licked envelopes for a life, and then gone where others forgot to go. Did you buy anything at the drapery?" Cray asked, not unkindly. Miss Reed's chin rose half an inch. "I asked Mr. Cutts for a little spirits, because the stamp ink had made a mark on the table, and Mrs. Bowman said I had done it. He would not sell to me. He said such things must be signed for by a household. I do not count as one. I do not buy. I fetch." Mrs. Denman looked thoughtful. "I bought spirits," she said, "for a mark on the mantel. Miss Reed came later and borrowed the bottle to clean the post counter. She returned it by the hour. I thought nothing of it." "Borrowed," Miss Marple repeated as one repeats a note to see if it will sound again. "And you returned it where?" "In the vicarage porch," Miss Reed said, wrapped politely because my hands smelt. "I do not like to smell of anything at work. It makes people say things about you. And yesterday morning," Miss Marple said, "who took the committee envelope from the cupboard and laid it on the table?" "I did," Mrs. Denman said. "I straightened the parish side and set out hymn books. The tin of buttons was forward. I thought Amelia had left it that way. I had only wished to see the inventory," Miss Denman added, flushing at the memory of inches. "And after the raffle," Miss Marple said, "who gathered the fallen scissors and set them aside?" "I would have," Lily said, "but I was told to leave them, and then everything happened, and afterward Miss Marple put them back." "Who replenishes lemonade?" Miss Marple asked, "when the jug wants dignity?" "I do," said Miss Reed surprisingly, "at every event. The vicar's wife is called away. The verger is in 2 places. Mrs. Bowman manages the float. Amelia counts paper plates. Lily serves. Mr. Pierce stares. Miss Pritchard commands. Someone must fill the jug and not be seen. People do not like the jug to remind them it is work." Cray's look shifted from curiosity to care. "Where was the jug while you were not being seen?" "On the parish sideboard. I filled it from the tap, carried it kerchiefed, set it down. I wiped a drip from its lip with my sleeve. It is vulgar to drip." "And did you wipe your hands before you brought a list to Miss Pritchard?" Miss Marple asked, and her voice had nothing in it of trap, only a tired compassion for inevitabilities. Miss Reed stared at her own fingers as if seeing them after years of use. There was a faint gloss along the pad of her thumb, the sort that comes from paper and bottle glass, and the habit of smoothing. "I always wipe," she said. "I am made of wiping." She took the list from me and corrected it. and patted her buttons while she spoke. She said, "Dear Miss Reed, you are very thorough. We shall have such work for you. You will not have to think at all." And then she went to the front to draw a raffle number, and everything else is a noise in my ears. The room became a held breath. Mrs. Bowman made the first foolishness. "If you are suggesting my assistant killed someone with polish," she said, outrage preserving her from comprehension, "I shall write the magistrate and spell his name correctly." "No," Miss Marple said, with a small firmness that recalled tea trays put safely down. "We are suggesting that a woman taught to wipe the world until it disappears, borrowed a solvent, prepared a single button with it to carry what she had not courage to throw, and returned the solvent where no one would suppose she had been. We are suggesting that yesterday evening, after message-delivering hours, that same woman remembered the ribbon's telltale E and crept to burn it, believing fire to be as obedient as a cloth." Miss Reed put her hands in her lap and pressed them together until they stopped shaking. "I did not mean her to die," she said in the flat tone of a person who has at last paid for saying that sentence. "I meant her to be ashamed in public. I meant to make her sit down. I thought, if her thumb smarted, if the solvent stung, it would look like a silly accident and the room would have a silence, and someone brave would say we have had enough of mottos. I thought I had made a lesson and not a poison. I do not know enough to calculate what cloth will carry. I have never been allowed to know enough. I am very good at errands." Cray did not move. The room seemed made of strings. One could hear them go slack. Mrs. Bowman began to cry exactly like a woman who has discovered that her assistant has a life beyond the counter and that she has participated in making it unlivable. Amelia reached for Miss Reed's hand with a timidness that then forgot itself and managed to be warm. Lily stood very still, her face young and not sentimental. Mrs. Denman lifted the committee roll and set it aside, because papers should not be in the way of repentance. "We will go to the station," Cray said softly. "You will tell me about the bottle and the button and the ribbon and the wastebasket. You will say everything, and we will write it down. I will do my best to understand what you thought would happen and what did." Miss Reed nodded once, like a person who's been taken at her word in the worst way and is oddly relieved. "I could not bear her to end us and then smile and give me a job at the end," she said. "I wanted to end a sentence that had me in it without my consent." "You have ended the wrong one," Miss Marple said, not cruelly. "But we shall try very quietly to begin another properly." Inspector Cray rose, and the room unbuckled around him in the small fidgets that follow a confession. He thanked those present, asked them to go home quietly, and walked beside Miss Reed as if escorting a tired letter that had travelled too long. Miss Marple waited while chairs were stacked and biscuits gathered, then stepped into the evening that had gentled itself out of duty. The hall door clicked like a drawer shut on a muddle. She stood a moment to let silence develop the day's print. Confessions that satisfy a crowd often leave one sentence blurred. It sat there just out of focus and refused to tidy itself. She went first to Dr. Plummer. He had the air of a man whose tea had cooled again, but he put on his spectacles with the professional forgiveness of someone who knows life, never waits for water to be exactly right. "I have a smell and a guess," he said before she asked. "Traces on the dress near the 4th button. A drying oil of the turpentine family, yes, but also, unless my nose has retired without notice, an alkaloid from plants, the general class not exact yet. Not bitter almonds, no prussic. No carbolics hospital. If you forced me to say something rude so you would hate me later, I would mutter nicotine or its kin, enough to be taken through a braided skin with a carrier." He lifted his eyebrows to apologize for the words. "It was a severe dose if so. Collapse could be quick. I will send samples to town in the morning, but town is never timely." "Thank you," Miss Marple said. "You shan't be hated. You have lent the village a firm adjective." She walked back along the green, where the day had folded its blue cloth for another meal, and thought of hands, Miss Reed's that made themselves invisible by wiping, Mrs. Denman's precise ones acquainted with keys, Amelia's tremblers that had pressed letters and hoped they would behave. Lily's deft fingers banded modestly. She thought of the second card. End it tonight. Typed in the vestry's crisp hand, not Amelia's admission, not Miss Reed's routine. Warnings often arrive after deeds. This one had tried to goad a deed. At the drapery, Mr. Cutts was locking up, counting the lock as if it had numbers. He brightened, as if she had asked a question already. "You will be wanting nothing now, Miss Marple, but I will willingly speak of anything." "You are kindness itself," Miss Marple said. "Who sells garden washes these days? The sort for greenfly and shame on roses." "Mr. J. at the ironmongery," he said. "We keep to honest cloth and leave the poisons to men who like labels." Mr. J. had not yet drawn his blinds. He was a square man who considered life a set of sensible weights. "Black leaf," he said without flourish when she asked. "Bought last week by the vicarage. Receipt to Mrs. Denman for the rose border, and by Mr. Pierce for his beans, though beans are largely a romance in his yard. You mix it with water. It smells like all the fathers in the world." "Do you sell rubber cots?" Miss Marple added. "Next door," he grunted. "Women's bulletins mystify me, but I know when something has thumbprints." She thanked him and came out just as the vicar's wife emerged from the lane with a sober paper parcel. She looked tired in a way that had decided not to show. "I have been to the station," Mrs. Denman said at once. "I wished to hear what would be said to Miss Reed. I asked to take her some tea. They were proper and declined." "Proper can be merciless," Miss Marple said. "Did you alter your roses?" "A blight," Mrs. Denman said. "It is a season for corrections." Then she looked at Miss Marple as at a mirror that refused to flatter. "You think I typed the second card?" "I did not. I thought of typing something to slow Honoria, yes, and then told myself to be useful instead." "Being useful is the most dangerous way of interfering," Miss Marple said. "Your hands belong everywhere the village keeps its tools. That is a compliment and a problem." "I will not add to your work by lying," Mrs. Denman said, level and pale. "I moved the tin, I bought spirits, I did not touch her dress. I cannot answer for my son and Lily beyond what you know already. Fondness, foolishness, not wickedness. If Honoria meant to make examples, she would have started with people who could bear it worst." "She was proposing to change the motto," Miss Marple said. "Even kind dictators punish literature first." They stood a little, letting history pass them with its shopping basket. Then Miss Marple said, "Shall we look at your greenhouse? I have been told of Blackleaf. I have also been told of the old thimble's cousin. Rubber for thumbs, that crack." Mrs. Denman led her through the vicarage gate. The greenhouse kept its summer like a secret. The air was soft with leaves practicing. The bottle of Blackleaf sat on a shelf, with the honest guilt of a sermon that had done some good and some harm. Beside the potting bench lay a small rubber cot, turned inside out like a shedskin. Though brownish ring stained the rim where it had kissed a bottleneck, Mrs. Denman saw it when Miss Marple saw it. She did not start. She had delivered babies and casseroles, and had trained her surprise to wait its turn. "I lent the spirits," she said quietly. "I did not lend that. Anyone could choose my porch and my shed, because no one thinks evil enters a vicarage by the side. It is one of the defects of my address." "Evil prefers a respectable tray," Miss Marple said. She took out her handkerchief, folded twice, and lifted the cot to her umbrella tip. "We shall let Inspector Cray decide whose thumb wore this glove. In the meanwhile I will be obstinate about a sequence. Miss Reed borrowed spirits and did a foolish, angry thing, stinging a button so it would sting back. Someone who knew more than stinging took the thought and improved it with science and malice. That person typed the second card to hurry a decision that would protect them. After, they crept to burn the ribbon, because one letter is sometimes a signature. The first two of those I will ascribe separately. The last is a person who had a pulse in their ears." "Miss Reed had a pulse in her ears," Mrs. Denman said. "She did," Miss Marple agreed. "But she told us she wipes to erase herself. Fire is a different grammar. It announces itself." The wastebasket felt like someone who believes in visible endings. "Pierce," Mrs. Denman said, surprising herself. "Pierce likes audiences," Miss Marple said. "He would have stayed to narrate his own sin." He might, however, have ordered black leaf in imitation of other men's competence, which is another matter, and for beans. They walked back across the green with evening starting to knit. Inspector Cray came to meet them, his face tired but steadier for work to do. Miss Marple held up the handkerchief-wrapped rubber. He whistled very softly. "You collect the village like stamps," he said. "Plummer's second call. He is willing to place a bet on nicotine given the signs. We will carry our new treasure to him and let him feel clever. I have Miss Reed safe and saying the same thing twice, which is the beginning of truth. The ending of truth wants a test," Miss Marple said. "May I borrow your constable on the hall door for a quarter of an hour? And your very best notice-writing voice." He nodded without arguing. It was a sign he had grown in the last 24 hours. She wrote on a parish card in large, homely letters, "The sewing club will continue under its present name. No change will be announced before Sunday. Please return any club items you have borrowed to the hall by 9 this evening. Thank you." She asked Mr. Pierce to take it to his window and to say it was official, which he adored in principle regardless of content. She asked the verger to prop the hall door and to sit inside with a book badly worth reading. She asked Mrs. Denman to go home and not be useful for an hour. She sent Lily to fetch the banner border again, because I am old and fussy, and told Amelia to make tea slowly. Then she sat in the half-light on the hall's front step and did nothing at all. It is the rudest trick one can play on people who enter rooms by errands. For a while nothing happened, and then, as the sky made that blue that refuses serious names, a shape came briskly along the path and turned in with the simple authority of someone who always has a reason. The figure paused upon seeing the door open, then recovered as if doors existed to welcome her. She held a parcel and a key, neither her own, both worn smooth by being shared. Her mouth had set itself to an expression that could be argued later. "Good evening, Mrs. Bowman," Miss Marple said, pleasant as laundry. The postmistress stiffened, then built a smile. "I have brought the junior ledger," she announced, elevating the parcel. "Miss Reed is unwell. I thought it better to place it under the committee's eye." "And the key?" Miss Marple asked. "The vestry," Mrs. Bowman said, a shade too late. "Miss Reed asked me to return it. People are taking liberties with property. I correct these things." "You correct many things," Miss Marple said. "It must be a consolation. Do bring the ledger in. We will put it upon the table and admire it." Inside, the hall smelt of wood that had calmed itself from the day's ordeal. The verger read, enormously absorbed in nothing. Mrs. Bowman laid the parcel down with the trust of a woman who has found that objects obey her when people do not. Miss Marple nodded to the verger, who closed his book by accident very loudly. In the sound, Mrs. Bowman's hand shot toward the notice tacked to the board. Her habit. Not her decision. 2 neat fingers pinching a corner to straighten. "Dear me," Miss Marple said softly, and watched the exactness of that pinch. The pad of the thumb had a faint yellowing in its whirl, the particular stain of something that does not wash like dirt, only wears like a pinion. "We shall send your ledger and your key with our new treasure to Dr. Plummer," she added. "Rubber remembers the shape it was given, and paper remembers whose hand smoothed it. We will let them tell us what we already know and what we still need proved." Mrs. Bowman's mouth found an argument and mislaid it. She put her hands flat and then could not bear them seen and lifted them again. "How you have always misunderstood Miss Reed," she said almost fiercely. "She is clever in a dangerous way. She likes to feel important. And you," Miss Marple said, very kind, "like to feel necessary. It is a cousin vice. The second card. Did you type it to hurry everyone into sense and prevent Honoria remaking something you believed was yours to supervise?" Mrs. Bowman blinked, and there was the small, crucial delay of a mind that has rehearsed lies for one accusation and must now rewrite them for another. Outside, the first bat took a neat stitch through the air. Inside, the parish clock prepared itself to be exact. Miss Marple heard the pause and felt the next event approaching, tidy as a hem pinned for sewing. Mrs. Bowman did not answer so much as rearrange the air. "The parish typewriter belongs in the vestry," she said, crisp. "If committees behave like persons, one must supply a tone. I have always supplied tone." "Ah," Miss Marple said. "Then you did type something." "I typed a reminder," Mrs. Bowman replied, taking shelter in a smaller truth. "We must end confusion. Honoria made muddle into doctrine. She meant to march us under the Parish Improvement League, as though we were girls in tunics. If a second card forced a decision, it did good. It did not kill anyone." Inspector Cray had come in quietly, and now stood at the end of the table, courtesy neat as a paperclip. "So the second card is yours." Mrs. Bowman's chin rose. "The card advised an ending. It did not advise murder. I will not carry a stranger's parcel merely because you want the picture tidy." "The picture is too tidy," Miss Marple said. "If we are trying to lift its folds." Cray unwound the ledger string and ran it between finger and thumb, noting the faint yellow smear. "Dr. Plummer thinks the agent was nicotine in an oily carrier, swift through a braided skin. We have a rubber finger cot with a ring that suggests a bottleneck visited it." "You will not find me mixing farm abominations," Mrs. Bowman said. "I am a woman of ink and postage." "And keys," Miss Marple said. "A woman of permissions, whose hands straighten notices, pass in and out of vestries, and are trusted to return what they take. A woman whose assistant confessed to a petty sting, and who, hearing it, could not endure the parish deciding without the right punctuation. A woman who corrects his habit, and when corrected in public, as Honoria corrected Miss Reed, burns." "I burn nothing," Mrs. Bowman said. "The ribbon?" Cray asked. She flinched. "I went to remove the sheet," she said, and pride stopped her. "Because the sheet bore an E too crisp to be anyone's but the vestry's," Miss Marple said. "Because the second card had been yours. You imagined 2 fingers pointing instead of 1. You realized, after Honoria fell, that a lesson meant to sting had become something else, and if you did not act, the village would not accept your edit." "I do not edit stories," she said. "I keep score. I keep order." "Tell us about the bottle," Cray said. "I never owned such a bottle." "Ask Mr. J." "We did," Miss Marple said. "But bottles travel by porches and errands, by the respectable invisibility of certain houses. The vicarage greenhouse wears decency like glass. Anything set inside is forgiven." Mrs. Bowman looked at the key as if it had turned vulgar. "I took the key from Miss Reed," she said. "Supervision passes to me when subordinates fail. And this evening, to return it?" She coloured at the posted notice. "Yes, I straighten things." "Does that incline me to poison? Accuse the hymn board of arithmetic." "The hymn board can only be wrong one way," Miss Marple said. "People are more inventive." "Let us be exact. Miss Reed, humiliated and furious in the small way, borrowed spirits, prepared 1 button to sting, and left the rest to habit. You, disliking any process you do not conduct, improved it. You took what you'd heard and added what your father used on roses. You placed the improved button among the spares." A bewildered girl looked out from under Mrs. Bowman's starch. "I thought—" She stopped. "We prefer thinking to feeling," Miss Marple said. The door opened. Lily stood with the banner border. "Shall I come back?" "Please stay," Miss Marple said. Lily pressed the same corner of the notice Mrs. Bowman had straightened. When she lifted her hand, there was no yellowing. Mrs. Bowman saw the contrast and could not unsee it. "Did you handle a bottle that left a ring on rubber?" Cray asked. "I fetched things," Mrs. Bowman whispered. "Tea and paper. The doctor when babies came early. Notices when they were wrong. The key from Miss Reed because she was taught to fetch and I was taught to finish." She swallowed. "And when Honoria's reforms were reported, and Miss Reed cried and called herself nothing but wiping, I heard my father's August. There's no reasoning with Greenfly. You washed them off. So I improved." "You bought nothing," Cray said. But you borrowed something, you improved something, you burned something, and you typed something. That is a sequence, but it is not proof, she said. You have stains and rubber in a sentence. You cannot show my hand on her dress. I never touched her. No, Miss Marple said. You would not pat. You would prearrange. You placed a button among her spares, knowing her thumb would find sorrow. And you trusted Miss Reed to be blamed for what she began. She paused. You meant honestly to keep the club as it was. Mercy is often cruel to those it excludes. Amelia Finch appeared in the doorway, white as paper with a tray she no longer balanced. Please, she said, don't end us to save us. Mrs. Bowman closed her eyes, then opened them exact again. Inspector, she said, the counterbell in her voice, if you are to take me, take me. If you will have explanations, I will speak until evening is used up. Dr. Plummer first, Cray said. He shall talk about stain and rubber and bottle. Then the station. She inclined her head slowly and glanced at Lily, not with apology but with a sorrowful envy. Mind your hands, she said. They will put you everywhere and then deny you lived. She went between Cray and the verger. The hall seemed to relax its shoulders. Lily steadied the banner. Amelia spilled a spoon and did not notice. Miss Marple stood very still. In that quiet the uncreased line showed at last. The second card, yes. The burn, yes. The button, likely. The bottle, borrowed. But between Mrs. Bowman's habit and Honoria's collapse lay a small obedient act without which the rest could not march. She turned to Lily. When lemonade drips, where do you set the jug to wipe it? On the sideboard, Lily said. Miss Reed wipes with her sleeve. If I'm there, I use a cloth. If not, she does it quickly. And the glass Miss Pritchard scarcely tasted, who moved it off the needlework table. Miss Reed, Lily whispered. She always moves abandoned things home. Yes, Miss Marple said. A thing out of place reproaches her. She moved the glass with the lipstick to the sideboard where she poured. She touched the jug lip and wiped her thumb. And when Honoria took the corrected list from that hand, she patted her buttons. That is the path. Solvent to thumb, thumb to button, button to sting. Mrs. Bowman prepared the improvement. Miss Reed delivered it like a letter. Neither meant death. They meant order. The village listened, uneasy but willing to be told. Cray rubbed his brow. We shall write it so the law can read. And tomorrow, Miss Marple said, we must decide what the sewing club is for, now that it has been used for everything else. Evening settled over the green with the propriety of a village, trying to look ordinary again. Inspector Cray took Mrs. Bowman to the station. The verger locked the hall as if careful metalwork might correct the day. Miss Marple went home thinking of temperaments, not villains. Her cottage admitted her with useful ignorance. She set the kettle and, by habit, 2 cups. A quick, gentle knock. Lily Hart stood on the step holding the banner border like a sober secret. I cannot sit with my thoughts, she said. Left alone, they tidy into fears. Tea persuades them to be constructive, Miss Marple said. Lily warmed her hands and watched them. Miss Reed told me, Lily said, that being useful felt like being chosen, and then suddenly she saw she was being used. Courage has begun in her, Miss Marple said. It will learn its way. What happens to Mrs. Bowman? The law will count acts as well as motives. A firmer knock replaced the kettle's murmur. Cray entered with Dr. Plummer. The rubber cart carries nicotine, Plummer said. The vicarage bottle bears the same ring. The Remington page shows the crispy. The stain by the 4th button is a drying oil enough to carry mischief through a grazed thumb, Cray added. Pierce saw Mrs. Bowman at the vicarage hedge with a parcel. Tonight he repeats it with fewer flourishes. Statements in the morning. Let the village attempt amendment first, Miss Marple said. I posted a notice inviting returns by 9. After a fright, people try to put back what they took from their own piece. Cray frowned thoughtfully. You expect something not on any list. A conscience often leaves a receipt. They walked to the hall. The verger, diligently idle, sat behind the half-open door. On the trestle lay a small heap. Stray hymn book, reel of cotton, shears, a buff envelope to the committee. Cray broke the seal. Inside lay 4 covered buttons matching Honoria's dress, and a 5th dulled where damp had once lingered. A slip of paper said, "I am returning what I ought never to have taken. Who brought it?" Cray asked. "A lady with a shawl," the verger said. "She smelt of violets and metal." Miss Marple lifted the duller button with her umbrella tip. "No new bloom," she said. "A relic, not a weapon. Someone wants to grow smaller. Read. She is at the station." "Bowman too," Miss Marple said. "Mrs. Denman would not write in anger. Amelia would write an apology even when innocent. This hand belongs to someone adjacent to their usefulness, who has discovered the difference between necessary and kind." They separated on the green. Plummer went to salvage his tea, Cray to his papers, Lily home with orders to treat rest as work. Sleep came to Miss Marple politely and late. Morning returned edges to hedges. Miss Marple went to the dairy, where Lily moved among bottles with courage that looked like briskness. Inspector Cray found her there. "Bowman admits the second card, the burned ribbon, the borrowed key," he said. "She denies preparing any button, calls the improved button hysteria." "The envelope argues otherwise," Miss Marple said. "Ask Mr. Cutts whether anyone bought fresh blanks." "None," Cray said. "That satin hasn't sold since April. If another button was made, it came from old stock someone kept." "Kept," Miss Marple repeated. "Who keeps one small thing as insurance on character?" They walked to the high street. The post office was shut. Through the glass they saw pigeonholes, the small basket for parish errands, and a hat whose violets had learned duty. "Perfume worn by a timid person to be brave," Miss Marple said. "She would still turn her face to be recognized. Last night our messenger kept her face averted. I think a shawl hid a woman who has never considered herself a person. Geraniums stood like old soldiers at the almshouse. Mrs. Kirk, the retired postmistress before Bowman, sat in a room neat as a diagram, faintly violet and metallic. I cannot write the law's words," she said, "but I know the weight of a cupboard. Miss Reed brought me a practice button last month. Satin from an old piece. She forgot it. Last night I carried it to the hall. If a thing can go back to its shelf, it should." "Thank you," Miss Marple said. Lily came from the dairy lighter by a thought. "The banner is ready for its motto," she said. "What shall we stitch?" "Something that does not command," Miss Marple said. "We will choose after lunch when thread is wiser." Cray looked at the church. "And tonight?" "Lend me the hall for an hour," she said. "There is always a last reaction when order is mended. It shows what most needed mending, a courtesy. We shall invite those who correct things to correct one more." Miss Marple went home by a path that let the village think. On her step lay a small envelope, cheap paper, exact fold. Inside was a single typed line, no salutation, set by the vestry's crisp E. "Mind the girl who never drops a stitch." The verger, pleased to have answered something, described the shawl again, this time noting its darn at the elbow and how the visitor kept her face as if the light were too bright. It was the kind of detail people produce when they long to be helpful. It told Miss Marple enough, a person used to entering rooms as an errand, not as a presence. At the almshouse door, a cat rose from a patch of sun and permitted itself to be believed in. Mrs. Kirk, who once could sort letters by the sound of a step, set her spectacles straight, as if aligning morals. When Miss Marple thanked her, she nodded once in a way that suggested 2 decades of unremarked decisions had agreed to be seen. That, too, was a sort of amendment, and it steadied the day as any constable could. She stopped at Mr. J's. "Have you a bottle of black leaf returned half-used?" she asked. "2," he said. "One from the vicarage, proper. One left anonymously on the step. The cork is worried. The lip bruised. Keep it for Inspector Cray," Miss Marple said. She sat later by the yew and counted quiet cause and effect. Bowman had improved an ugly idea into a fatal one for the sake of control. Reed had carried it as an errand for order. An old woman had returned a relic for peace. Somewhere among them sat a smaller will, anxious to be blameless, doing other people's decisions faster than their makers, useful, invisible, efficient. In the evening, the hall stood open to a quieter gathering. No speeches. Chairs set as if ready. Mrs. Denman came. Amelia with a tray that rattled less. Mr. Pierce for hearing. Lily with the border, her needle threaded. Miss Marple asked for help with measuring, made an error on purpose and watched who corrected it without looking up. Habit reveals itself where pride believes it hidden. "Dear me," she said, turning the tape. "I am 2 inches wrong." Lily's hands paused but did not reach. Mrs. Denman checked and smiled. Amelia counted softly and kept still. Very small movement at the edge, someone replacing the tape where it belonged and smoothing the crease, was the answer Miss Marple had expected. She thanked the mover without naming her. The village was almost ready for names. Tomorrow would bring the motto and the rest. Tonight must hold the thread. The hall waited with its chairs in even rows, the banner border on the trestle like a patient with good prospects. Miss Marple arrived before the others, opened the windows to let evening behave itself, and set a saucer, a thimble, and a length of chalk at the edge of the table, ordinary things in their proper places. Habit, she had found, will always go to greet its friends. Mrs. Denman came first, exact and weary, but with a calm that had made many disasters seem like administrative errors. Amelia Finch followed, carrying a sewing basket too carefully, as if it might declare her guilty or innocent by how it was held. Lily Hart entered last of the invited 3 and stood for a heartbeat at the door, as if unsure whether she belonged more to the village than to herself. Then she came straight to the banner and set her hand upon the linen with the competence that made tenderness possible. "We won't speak long," Miss Marple said, her voice the safe temperature of tea. "We will choose a motto, make our first stitches, and then go home to let everything else choose itself." Mr. Pierce slipped in sideways with a newspaper under his arm and the face of a man who has come to record, not to alter. The verger perched near the door with his book, newly proud of his uselessness. A few more drifted in and sat as if chairs hoarded comfort. Miss Marple nodded. The village would not be turned out of its own story. "Shall we try?" Mrs. Denman offered. "In quietness we mend." The words lay properly on the table, undecorated and sufficient. "It is not scripture," Amelia said, as if that were an apology. "But it is tidy." "Tidy will do," Miss Marple replied. "The last days have not lacked text." Lily threaded a needle, the motion small as breathing. Miss Marple watched the line of her mouth, which did not lie even when it smiled. "Begin us," she said. Lily set her first stitch with that particular care which is not hesitation but intention. The needle went down and came up and found its place. A word started to exist. It was very hard in that quiet to believe in murder. Perhaps that is why villages have always preferred their deaths out of doors. "I had a note," Miss Marple said into the small rattle of cotton, as one might remark on rain, "typed by our vestry's machine. Mind the girl who never drops a stitch." The writer chose a truth that can be read several ways. "People always warn against the steady ones," Mr. Pierce said, "because sentences feel incomplete without him. Dramatists prefer mishaps." "They do," Miss Marple agreed, "and so do tidy minds. The girl who drops no stitch can be dangerous, because you will hand her your work without noticing you have handed it. She will do it quicker than you could and better and quietly. You will encourage her to be part of the furniture, until you realize the furniture is what holds the room up. And then, when she declines to hold something you have set upon her, you call it rebellion and not fatigue." Amelia made a small sound of recognition that asked leave to exist. "I moved the tape last night," she blurted, color rising. "You didn't say my name. You saw me. I cannot stop correcting things that no one will thank me for." "I did not—" She forced her hands to be still. "I did not put a button among hers. I wouldn't have known how to oil wickedness. But I did move the tape. It is my vice. It is also your virtue," Miss Marple said. "We will let it be both and check your work kindly." Mrs. Denman's gaze went to Lily's hands. "Tommy has been a coward," she said, with the practical bravery that made her acceptable to God and police alike. I have said so to him. He is learning to be tall without borrowing it from a girl's patience. If Honoria had lived, she added, with a small, deeply felt injustice, I would have asked her to correct him gently and been reproved for interfering. There is no system that will save us from ourselves. Miss Marple lifted the saucer and set it nearer the chalk. Mrs. Denman's attention went to the misalignment at once. Her hand adjusted both objects by a hair without pausing her sentence. It was not guilt. It was fidelity to order. Habits had begun to introduce themselves kindly rather than in ambush. That too felt like a clean page. Inspector Cray came in halfway through the quietness, took up a place against the wall, and listened in the manner of a man stacking paragraphs. Bowman will be charged, he said when the stitch allowed, with administering a noxious thing and with attempting to destroy evidence. Reed will be charged more gently. It will not be pretty, but it will be honest. Mr. J has his bottle for Plummer to admire. The rubber has told its story. The Crisp E behaves like a name on a calling card. The verger coughed with the timidity of a man who has a nicety to offer. Mrs. Bowman once told me, he said, that my hymn numbers were aspirational. I will not miss that. Mr. Pierce looked chagrined and delighted at once. I shall write, he murmured, about the danger of improvements. You will write, Miss Marple said, that people became tired of being improved and tried to improve back, and that we are choosing a motto which relies less on command. They worked in that human quiet, where grief and work make peace by taking turns. Miss Marple did not stitch. Her eyes were for the room. Outside, dusk laid its apron over the hedges. The tea kettle creaked and gave in. People came and went on proper errands. The ordinary mended itself by being allowed to. When the first word sat there, small and sufficient, Miss Marple folded her hands. I want to tell you how the mischief walked, she said. And all heads turned with the obedience we give a voice that does not make a habit of speaking. Miss Reed was stung by humiliation and did a petty thing, polished one button with a volatile solvent, believing it would correct a person the way one corrects a smudge. She wiped the jug. She handled the list. Her thumb met Miss Pritchard's habit. But her ignorance could not bring death by itself. Mrs. Bowman improved the thought. She made sure a certain button among the spares was ready for sting, and more than sting. She borrowed a key because keys always agreed with her. She used a poison, whose label looked respectable because it lived in a vicarage. She typed a second card to make the ending convenient. When endings turned unruly, she burned a ribbon. Neither woman meant a corpse. They meant to insist. We are very dangerous when our virtues feel underemployed. And the last note? Cray asked. The anonymous mind the girl? A protection and a test, Miss Marple said, typed by someone with access who feared we would punish the wrong steadiness. It arrived when we had begun to be sensible and risked becoming fashionable about it. I prefer courage unfashionable. I think it was written by a person who saw the thread clearly and wanted it cut in the right place while we were still holding it. Mrs. Denman looked at the chalk, then at her own hands. She did not confess. She did not need to. I have always been a worst-case machine, she said quietly. My notice writing can be meddlesome. If I typed, it was for the best. I am sorry for all the times my best has been uninvited. It is a good best, Miss Marple said. Let it arrive with tea more often than with type. Lily tied off the word and set the needle down as one sets down a thought one intends to return to. Her mouth was steady. People will still think of me when they see a straight hem, she said. Not unkindly, I hope. They will think, Miss Marple said, smiling, that you do not drop a stitch, and they will remember we asked you to carry fewer of ours. The hall door opened. Dr. Plummer poked in, apologetic for existing while women worked. I succumb to curiosity, he said, also to biscuits. I have sent to town. The town will reply long after the village has decided its mind. In the interim, I congratulate you on choosing virtue with less vinegar. Join us, Mrs. Denman said, and made room in the way that did not feel like squeezing. They were still sitting so, with a small content beginning round the edges. When Mr. J appeared in the doorway with awkwardness, he wore like a borrowed coat. He held a paper-wrapped parcel with and without ceremony. "It's not my place," he said to the heir, "but a thing left on a step is a sort of customer. I thought perhaps this wanted the committee more than it wanted me." He set the parcel on the table and withdrew as if from a ledger that balanced by itself. Inspector Cray loosened the string. Inside lay the bottle of black leaf returned anonymously, the second one, its cork anxiously re-worried, the lip bruised by a thumb that had tried industriousness and been sorry. A scrap of paper had travelled with it. "I am done improving other people." "That handwriting," Amelia whispered, surprised into a little laugh that had water at the edges. "It is like Mother's when she was determined to be cheerful. The room considered what to do with Mercy when it has arrived with poor spelling and better intentions." Miss Marple closed the parcel again. "We shall give this to Inspector Cray," she said, "and then we shall have our tea." They did. Cups steadied, voices softened. The needle moved the way a conversation should, never tugging so hard the cloth puckers. Outside, night began its sensible work of making the world manageable by removing details. The village, having been told a few truths in its own language, began to repeat them with fewer improvements. When the tray had been cleared, and the quietness half-stitched, Miss Marple rose. "One last thing," she said, and the room gave her attention ready to approve what it had already decided. "We will not end the sewing club. We will end the habit of using it as a place to tidy one another's lives. We will keep mending, and we will make our tea stronger than our notices. If anyone must be corrected, we shall begin with our measuring tapes and our voices." There was the kind of approval that does not applaud because it would seem undisciplined. Mr. Pierce, who had never been good at silence, managed one. The verger, who had learned the worth of being seen doing nothing, polished his spectacles as if preparing them to witness better behavior. Lily lifted the banner and smoothed it without thinking. Amelia straightened the edges with the guiltless relief of a woman told she may be herself and still belong. Mrs. Denman, who had typed warnings and borrowed bottles and intended good, looked at Miss Marple with a gratitude that did not ask to be forgiven first. "Tomorrow," Miss Marple said, "we shall take the banner to St. Luke's. The village may read its new words and disagree with them in private as much as it likes," Inspector Cray offered. His arm as if the floor might have grown treacherous. "You could have been a sergeant," he said, and then, because admiration makes one honest, added, "I am very glad you are not mine." "It would have soured us both," Miss Marple said cheerfully. She put on her coat. "Walk me to my gate and tell me which paragraph is worrying you." He did. Under the yew they stood while the evening settled into its sensible shape. "I keep thinking," he said, "that if you hadn't noticed a smear on a button, we should be saying we were unlucky." "We are so seldom unlucky," Miss Marple said. "We are usually ourselves." He laughed, then grew sober. "And you? What will you do now we have finished improving one another?" "Unpick a row of knitting I did crossly," she said. "It will keep me from thinking unhelpful thoughts." At her gate Lily caught up, breathless because hope had been running. "Will you show me the old-fashioned way to set a hem without measuring twice?" she asked. "It is a trick of the hand," Miss Marple said, "and of the eye. I will show you in the morning." They parted on the green where the bunting had been put away, and the air had stopped pretending to be festive. The parish hall closed its eyes like a good dog. The day, which had wanted too much from everyone, said sorry without words. Miss Marple hung up her hat, fed her fire its sensible diet, and sat with her knitting. After 2 rows she sighed and unpicked them. People do not like to be told what their business is. They will, however, do it if asked kindly and provided with something to keep their hands from mischief. The needle blinked in the lamplight and obeyed an old woman who had never needed a motto to be efficient. Outside, the village put itself to bed, improved hardly at all and therefore much better. The banner went up on Sunday, as if nothing tragic had ever been stitched beneath that roof. The church smelled of lilies and furniture polish, and the new words lay modestly across the linen. In quietness we mend. People read it and found themselves nodding, some because they agreed, some because nodding is a way to be left in peace. Miss Marple took her pew with the neat self-effacement of a woman who has spent a lifetime noticing everything and advertising nothing. She watched faces come to rest on the single comfortable story villages prefer. There had been wickedness. The wicked were caught. Goodness resumes. After the service, Inspector Cray joined her at the lich gate with an expression that had learned irony and chosen not to use it. "We have the rest sewed up," he said. "Bowman has signed a statement, very tidy, very stout. She admits putting the prepared button among the spares late Saturday. The rubber cot, the bottles bruised, the E on the ribbons, her key at the wrong time. She understands the picture. Reed's part is set in its smallness and its pity. The magistrate will see two women who mistook correction for virtue and found themselves in company they never meant to keep." "And the village?" Miss Marple asked. "Already composing a lesson," he said dryly. "Pierce has titled it, 'On the Perils of Improvement.' I may confiscate the headline on aesthetic grounds." They walked down the path together. Tommy Denman stood outside, looking his height in the self-conscious way of boys who intend to keep it. He nodded to Lily, who nodded back without inviting him to be foolish. His mother, with the discipline of a lifetime's tact, allowed it to be enough. Amelia Finch came by with her account book under her arm, and a confidence it had never given her before. She had resolved, it seemed, to be useful on purpose, and not only because usefulness was expected. "You did not need the town laboratory," Cray said, as they crossed the green. "Plumber's bottle and your umbrella did the whole thing. Town would have told you what you already knew in a tone that suggested discovery," Miss Marple murmured. "I prefer the village voice. It scolds less." He laughed, and then, sobered by conscience, added, "If Honoria's family ask what happened, I shall say she was done in by habits, theirs and other people's." "That is nearly always the truth," Miss Marple said. "We often die of our virtues taken to the wrong conclusion. The days after arrange themselves as days do. Mrs. Bowman went to town in a car that looked like a judgment only to people who wanted it to. She kept her back very straight, and allowed no one the comfort of seeing her weep. Miss Reed, pale but uncrushed, returned to the counter when permitted, and something in the village shifted around her like furniture made to measure, no longer invisible, no longer given the weight of everyone else's plates. Mrs. Denman, whose sentences had sometimes arrived where they were not invited, discovered the courage to leave letters unwritten and to make sandwiches instead. It is a greater discipline, that one, than most sermons. There was a small funeral for Honoria Pritchard. Miss Marple went and did not pretend to be more sad than she was. She let the prayer settle on the fact of a woman who had been efficient, often generous, sometimes unkind and very sure. Even the sure deserve a good hymn. When they came to the phrase, "Teach us to number our days," Miss Marple's lips moved with an attentiveness that did not require piety to be sincere. The sewing club met again the following Tuesday under the same roof, the same light and not quite the same weather of souls. They began with silence and work, which is a more honest order than speeches. Amelia laid out cloth without tremor, and when she measured, she let Lily check her and laughed when they were both wrong by a quarter-inch. The laughter released something in the beams. The verger passing admired without correcting. Mr. Pierce came to the door with a parcel and departed without comment because he had decided to be wise for a fortnight and wanted the effort to show people remember better when they have a needle in their hands. Miss Marple said, threading hers. "It keeps the fingers from wagging." "Will we do anything different?" Lily asked. "Only the important things," Miss Marple said. "We shall ask before we improve. We shall correct slowly. We shall permit others to be clever at the same time." "Ambitious," Mrs. Denman murmured, and smiled as if ambition could sometimes be forgiven. In the quiet that followed, Miss Marple ran back over the line of the case, the way one runs back over a seam to see if it will hold. The smear on the covered button, the raw half-moon on Honoria's thumb, the lemonade jug's tidy lip, the crisp E that treated every page like a formal letter, the rubber ring that remembered a bottle's edge. The packet returned to the hall, the anonymous note asking her to look at the girl who never dropped a stitch, in truth a plea not to hurt steadiness while pursuing guilt. It had all been in place by Sunday evening, but people require time to accept a conclusion that does not flatter them. In that too the village was only human. When she put down her needle, Inspector Cray was at the door again, looking for an egg he did not need. "If you had not matched that faint yellow on Bowman's thumb to the cot's ring," he said, "I should still be trying to convince myself she had merely typed. And if you had not caught Reed's sleeve on the jug, I should have called it an airy theory." "No," Miss Marple said, amused. "You would have called it circumstantial, and then usefully worried until it became substantial. Your mind is more patient than you admit." He inclined his head to the compliment as if it were a summons. "There is one thing left. Pierce has submitted his piece. Would you like the headline?" "I will not be able to help myself," Miss Marple confessed. "In quietness we mend," he read, "and other dangerous remedies." "It will do Pierce good," she said, "to frighten himself with common sense." She folded the half-made hem, aligning it with a care that was muscle memory rather than obsession. "Do not let him forget the names, though. People forgive more easily when they are allowed to remember." They stepped out together onto the green, where the hedges had taken back their private business, and the parish hall looked benevolent again. A breeze worried the ewe, and then thought better of it. Tommy crossed with a parcel of provisions. He tipped his cap to Miss Marple like a boy who intends to behave because someone has shown him how without humiliation. Lily behind them was humming without noticing she did. "Are you satisfied?" Cray asked. "Satisfaction is a very forward emotion," Miss Marple said. "I am content. The village has remembered itself without having to pretend it was a different place. That is all one can ask. And you are going to do what now, ma'am?" "Darn 2 pairs of socks because I put it off," she said. "Then have some jam because I earned it." He laughed and left her at the path. She went in, set the kettle, and fetched her darning mushroom. The house, which had seen so much thought disguised as housekeeping, welcomed the return of simple work. On the mantel, beside the clock, lay the 2 typed cards that had started the clatter. She did not keep them as trophies. She kept them the way one keeps an old prescription. Unpleasant to recall, useful to consult. End the sewing club at once, end it tonight, there. Is always someone who wants endings when they mean to avoid better. Beginnings. The clock chimed, with the relieved air of an object that has been allowed to tell the time instead of the truth. Miss Marple poured her tea. Outside, the village carried on, a little bruised, a little braver, hands occupied with useful things. If, from time to time, a notice was written and not posted, a list made and then torn up, a correction held on the tongue until a kinder phrase presented itself, that, too, was a form of mending. She set her needle and began to close the small, neat gap in a sock heel, drawing the wool across like a stitch over a wound. It was not wisdom to say out loud, but she thought it. Improvement, to be safe, must begin with oneself and end there often. Everything else can be asked for very gently over tea, and that which is to say the quiet the village learned to provide.